The planned approach to change revolves around achieving change through a managerially planned organisational change programme that is typically comprised of a series of stages. The approach is therefore top-down, as the initiatives come from management and are then followed by subordinates in the organisation. One of the early proposed model is Lewin's three-step model of unfreezing, change, refreezing. These steps are based around the force field analysis approach by Lewin in 1943, which states that in an organisation there are assisting forces and resisting forces to change. If assisting forces are greater, change will happen. If resisting forces are greater, the status quo is maintained. In Lewin's three-step approach, unfreezing creates a disequilibrium, where assisting forces become greater than resisting forces, so that change is more successful, as it is seen as needed. This is done through the status quo or group norms becoming unstabilised, and can also involve making those concerned with the changes convinced of its necessity. The second step is about recreating an equilibrium between the assisting and resisting forces by moving the organisation to a new and, for organisational members, acceptable state. The last stage involves stabilising the new state and preventing it from regressing into previous behaviour. The central theme is that through knowledge, commitment and learning, it is possible to reduce resistance to change and create a need or will to change among employees. Managing change through the reduction of forces that prevent change rather than through increasing the forces that are pushing for change. Dawson, 2003. There is, though, criticism of this approach in that it views organisations in too simplistic a manner, where all behaviour can be governed by group norms and values, with being part of the group dynamics school. The Open Systems School, meanwhile, moves towards viewing change as more part of a set of various interconnected subsystems models. Using this approach provides a more elaborate model, such as Kotter's 8-step model, which maps onto Lewin's model, but is more elaborate. The steps are: establish a sense of urgency by examining the reality, possible crisis and/or opportunity. 2. Creating the guiding coalition of leaders and managers who will work in the team with the rest of their members of the organisation and the change agents. 3. Developing a vision and strategy to direct the change and achieve the goal. 4. Communicate the change vision with every means in a constant mode, not only by emails, by flyers, but by really acting in a way that communicates a different symbol. 5. Empower and act according to the vision by surpassing eventual obstacles, encouraging creativity and risk-taking. 6. Create visible short-term wins and allow a reward for those who drive the change. There's a sort of learning process involved which makes the organisation able to update by learning from the change driving itself. 7. Consolidate gains and build new changes perspective by promoting and encouraging the people, as well as making credible the new systems and practice. And 8. Institutionalise the new approaches, develop the leadership, and a more effective management. Each change is different, and it is not always true that following a stage-step model will lead to a successful result. As Cotter in 1992 affirms, changes are messy and surely filled with surprises along their journey. The approach is critiqued for focusing on leadership as the most important aspect of the change process, without taking enough in consideration of the economic and financial aspects, the political forces both inside and outside the organisation, the oppositions and the other restraining forces to change. This top-down approach can also become a source of frustration for employees at the lower ranks of an organisation who feel ignored. And today, change is taking place at such speed that it is nearly impossible to align new behaviours to environmental demands before those demands change, Essien et al. 2008. Due to its focus on group involvement and trial and error testing, planned change initiatives are often criticised as slow, static and only suitable for times of stability, not dynamic interrelatedness and complexity. Hatch and Cunliffe, 2006. Indeed, by their nature, they view change as a one-off event, when in reality it is currently an evolving process. O'Keefe, 2011. Hatch and Cunliffe in 2006 also suggest that planned change can be unethical, and a fear-producing vehicle for domination that extends existing top-down power structures. And the criticism of planned change efforts is not unfounded. Failure rates tend to be very high, up to 70%. Sackman et al., 2009. Recent research adds further criticisms to why plan change approaches fail, which include the difficulty in negotiating conflicting group identities, McKines et al., 2006, leadership behaviour problems, and inertia deriving from a company resource position, Kratz and Zajic, 2001, as well as a failure to appreciate organisation environment interdependencies and connectivity, Sackman et al., 2009. Increasing complexity requires organisations to rethink the nature of hierarchy and control, learn the art of managing in changing contexts, and promote self-organising processes, and learn how to use small changes to create large effects. Burns, 2005. As Wyke 2000 suggests, plan change efforts often get the credit in decision-makers' eyes for successes in delivering new strategies for survival, but they rarely change the organisation's underlying nature, and problems usually reoccur. Plan changes have been found to be the most suitable when there is an anticipated need for structural changes, Sackman et al., 2009. But structural changes alone are not sufficient to guarantee organisational learning or the sustainability of change efforts. While plan change efforts often focus on diminishing the restrictive environmental forces, emergent change efforts focus on identifying the enabling forces and enhancing them. Levine, Tarandek and Bartonek, 2009. Weissert and Goging in 2002 investigated a planned change process whereby a Medicaid-managed care initiative was conducted in Michigan. The success of the implementation was found to be strongly dependent on its defined goals, such as cost reduction and compliance with the change. However, it also found great dissatisfaction with the change from stakeholders. Chekarian and Mavima in 2000 discovered in their analysis of government reform in Florida that resource magnificence became even more complex when multiple organisational changes are implemented as part of a comprehensive reform agenda. The authors found that multiple organisational changes interact with one another, causing synergies and trade-offs. For example, the pursuit of multiple changes that demand modest amounts of similar resources can lead to synergies, increasing the likelihood that all changes will be implemented successfully. The pursuit of multiple changes that require large amounts of similar resources, on the other hand, tends to result in trade-offs. Trade-offs in turn result in winners and losers, with low-cost changes taking precedence over or even displacing the more costly ones. This suggests how for larger change, processes using a planned approach may be flawed, and there is an increased importance on increasing involvement for the change process for all. Puzzle and Barrage in 2011 investigated a case study for a home healthcare and hospice organisation, HHO, that engaged in a multi-year planned change process. A notable finding was how change was communicated with employees, with it coming across as though the chair of the process was making all the decisions and they were not to contribute, with it even coming across as though they were considered untrustworthy and that they are subordinates rather than part of a family, which was the identity that was previously targeted. The result was that although employees agreed that change was needed, they had serious reservations on how the change was managed. This led to outright distrust of leadership, as they felt the identity for them that leadership was targeting was unacceptable, which meant that any planned change where there was any missing information that was unavailable to employees was treated with suspicion. This suggests that even if forces can be stabilised, there is real importance on trust for change to be successful, and using a planned approach, even if based on theory which may have some validity, may prompt problems. Emergent change is described as unpredictable, often unintentional, and can come from anywhere, and involving relatively informal self-organising. Wyke and Quinn, 1999. It is also iterative. Change emerges simultaneously as actors organise work in given structures, and it involves improving the existing enabling conditions in the organisational environment. Stacey, 1992. As Stacey in 2005 suggests, most organisations these days operate at the edge of chaos and far from the equilibrium, with instability and stability intertwined and difficult to separate. As natural systems, organisations need to learn to operate within these conditions, since too much stability and control will cause the organisation to become unresponsive to its environment and decline. Stacey, 2001. Emergent change occurs in real time, Burns, 2006, and therefore fosters ongoing realignment with the environment, ongoing learning and strategy making. Emergent change theories emphasize the processual nature of organizing, Hoskin and Morley, 1992. Thus, the way people's interactions lead to unpredictable outcomes and difficulties in predicting and therefore planning beforehand the path that change initiatives will take. One such example is the volunteer group that sprung up spontaneously after the destruction of the World Trade Center in 9/11. Borhose, 2008. Volunteers developed a new pattern for coordinating action after the need for doing so was explicitly recognized and accepted. A further example is the innovation processes as explained by Cantor in 1999, where customers, suppliers and venture partners become all-important sources of innovation. Through the use of new technologies, organizations are starting to leverage stakeholders' input quickly and effectively. This feedback, however, is largely unpredictable and might lead to the recognition of felt need for change in a direction that the company has not considered before. These examples suggest that change interventions need to go beyond the episodic change formulated by Lewin's model and to incorporate notions of emergence. Woolman in 2000 investigated German local government in the 90s, where there was an interchange between radical reform from higher levels of government and a more intermittent incrementalism-like approach driven by those working inside administrations. Woolman found a lack of intervention or interference by the higher levels of government to be a condition for successful changes. Rational planning in Germany was short-lived and lasting change occurred through incremental bottom-up approaches. Starr in 2002 provided an example of a Swedish telecommunication company whose planned attempt to implement a new manufacturing unit was derailed by an unanticipated recession that thwarted their original plans and transformed them into a more emergent approach to change. Kuna and Kuna in 2003 also discussed the socialist Cuban government's planned top-down regulatory change being combined successfully with emergent entrepreneurial efforts that incorporate Western management techniques in such a way that agents and structures interacted to produce the social innovations required in the face of environmental change. As change agents, leaders would be suited to enable tolerance of the unknown and coping with the paradoxes that emergent change usually brings about, Wyke in 2000. However, this nature of the role of leaders needing to change in emergent approaches can suggest how in practice it becomes more popular for leaders to take a planned approach. Wyke and Quinn in 1999 compared PlanEmerge change, although they term planned change as episodic change, where change is presumed as occurring during periods of divergence when organisations are moving away from their equilibrium conditions, and term emergent change as continuous change, where change occurs through the realisation of a new pattern of organising in the absence of explicit a priori intentions, or Lekowski 1996. Change is described as situated and grounded in continuing updates of work processes, Brown and Dugit 1991, and social practices, Dusarkas 1996. Researchers focus on accommodations to and experiments with the everyday contingencies, breakdowns, expectations, opportunities, and unintended consequences, Olakowski 1996. As these accommodations are repeated, shared, amplified, and sustained, they can, over time, produce perceptible and striking organisational changes. Van Nistelrooy and Simia in 2006 studied a planned change in the public sector with UWV. UWV is the administrative organisation for the Dutch Collective Employee Benefit Regulations. The project involved creating a new organisational unit capable of handling 90% of the applications within 6 weeks. It involved creating a project strand which involved changing the organisational design using a planned approach with set deadlines and design targets, and creating a change strand which aimed to feed the project strand with information for new work processes which, although structured into stages, had elements of a more emergent approach. The workforce embraced the process willingly, although top management did intervene when a rift between newly aligned departments emerged. There was some success in achieving the goals of the project strand. However, by downplaying the change strand, with management refusing to share power with employees at critical stages, the aims associated with this track within the project became largely unreachable. This case study underlies a key issue when trying to combine planned and emergent change, in that by using emergent change interventions, it can prompt employees to feel as though they're being included in the process. However, if in the end it is the planned approach that is really used and the emergent approach is largely ignored, then in reality, employees are likely to feel less in agreement than if there was never any promise of their concerns being listened to in the first place. Burns in 2004 notes that planned and emergent change should not be treated as competitors. They highlight a series of changes occurring between 1996 and 2000 in the firm XYZ Construction. They note how the managing director adopted a planned approach to change the organisational structure rather than an emergent one, even though in the past emergent change had been successful for the company. In bringing about changes in the attitudes and behaviours of manager and staff and improving the organisation's performance, the managing director believed that structural change could not be achieved by a range of slow, local and change initiatives. He saw that it needed to be a relatively quick and coordinated approach which was capable of involving many people and winning over the majority of the organisation, especially those who might be in a position to block change. Burns notes how the recognition that the emergent approach to change was inappropriate for achieving a change in the organisation's structure demonstrated one of the key competencies necessary to achieve successful change: understanding the organisation's context. This case study further underlies the point that Pettigrew in 2000 makes, that the evidence suggests arguing for just one approach to change is strange. It is clear from the XYZ experience that planned and emergent change are not competitors, with each one seeking to show that it is better than the other, nor are they mutually exclusive or incapable of being used in combination. Rather, they are allies, each one appropriate to particular change situations, but neither appropriate for all change situations. Bamford and Forrester in 2004 conclude that there is no best way to manage change. The key issues for managers is to understand what they are trying to achieve, the context in which their organisation is operating, and the strengths and weaknesses of the various approaches to change. One model which places importance on taking a situational approach is the Dumpy State Change Matrix of 1993, which suggests that when considering what type of change is appropriate, the scale of the change and the style of management should be considered, and that should then inform which styles should be utilised. In their paper, 13 case studies were examined, and it was found that traditional models are inadequate at representing what approaches are actually used in organisations. The study found that all 4 of the styles of change management indicated in the diagram can be effective, so long as they are applied appropriately to the organisation in question. Another perspective on looking at how there is a need to move away from planned change is by looking at the whole area of organisational structure. Agino et al. In 2018 argue that the traditional paradigm of viewing organisations as machines is no longer appropriate, and that it is more appropriate to use a paradigm where organisations are seen as organisms. Part of this are what is referred to as agile organisations, who are characterised by a shared purpose and vision across the organisation, a network of empowered teams, a flat structure, clear accountable roles and active partnerships, rapid decision and learning cycles, continuous learning and experimentation, a cohesive community, entrepreneurial drive and role mobility, and next generation enabling technology. There is evidence for the utility of being a so-called agile organisation. When pressure is applied, the agile organisation reacts by being more than just robust. Performance actually improves as more pressure is exerted. Taleb 2012. Bazagos et al. In 2015 found that agile organisations have a 70% chance of being in the top quartile of organisational health, the best indicator of long-term performance. Moreover, such companies simultaneously achieve greater customer centricity, faster time to market, higher revenue growth, lower costs, and a more engaged workforce. Olbeck et al. 2017.